on them, Piers. Vanity Fair with a hit piece on her in particular.
Netflix series have so far been less than kind, unimaginative and frustrating, said Hollywood's Bible, Variety magazine. So sickening, I almost brought up my breakfast.
Piers Morgan didn't so much respond to the Vanity Fair expose as detonate it. The moment the article dropped, he treated it like confirmation, not revelation. This wasn't new information to him. This was the receipt phase. The part where the American media finally caught up to what he'd been shouting into the void for years while being labeled obsessed, bitter, or personally wounded. And he wasted no time reminding everyone of that.
He'd been secretly married by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Welcome to reality. He opened with that unmistakable blend of relish and fury. Vanity Fair has finally figured out what anyone with a functioning brain could see from the start. This wasn't a tabloid ambush. That was his first and loudest point. This was Vanity Fair, the same magazine that once polished Meghan Markle into a symbol of enlightened modern royalty. The same outlet that treated the Sussexes like a moral upgrade to the monarchy itself. And now it was pulling the curtain back and asking the question no one in Hollywood wanted to answer out loud. Were we conned? Morgan framed the article not as a betrayal, but as an overdue correction. Hollywood, he argued, only turns when the cost of pretending becomes higher than the cost of telling the truth. And according to Vanity Fair's own reporting, the pretending had become exhausting. What really energized him were the sources, not anonymous trolls, not palace leaks, actual professionals, producers, staffers, colleagues, people whose careers depend on discretion, people who don't speak unless they're done protecting someone. And what they described, Morgan said, wasn't misunderstood brilliance or creative tension. It was dysfunction. Chronic pattern dysfunction.
Nobody cares. No one cared about their podcast series.
He zeroed in immediately on the Spotify disaster. The deal that was supposed to crown Harry and Meghan as serious content powerhouses. The deal that ended not with a quiet non-renewal, but with an executive publicly calling them grifters. Morgan practically savored that word. Do you know how badly you have to mess up, he said, for a global corporation to drop the mask like that? According to Vanity Fair's reporting, hours were wasted trying to get Prince Harry interested in podcast ideas, not refining them, not challenging them, interested in them at all. Meetings went nowhere. Concepts evaporated. Momentum died. One producer reportedly worked on just 3 episodes of Meghan's Archetypes podcast before taking a leave of absence and then leaving the company entirely. Morgan didn't call that burnout. He called it escape. 3 episodes, he repeated. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. That's a working environment people are running from. Then came the line that Morgan clearly considered the article's quiet execution shot. A professional who worked directly with Meghan Markle said her public perception might improve if she acknowledged her own shortcomings instead of remaining trapped in a victim narrative.
Sadly, millions of people around the world will watch this series and they'll...
Morgan paused on that. Let it breathe. That, he said, is devastating because it's reasonable. This wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty. It was measured criticism from someone who had seen behind the curtain and wasn't impressed. And to Morgan, that was far more damning than any insult he'd ever hurled. He then twisted the knife by pointing out the central hypocrisy Vanity Fair couldn't ignore. The Sussex brand is built on compassion, mental health advocacy, and workplace empathy. Yet, the very people working closest to them were reportedly taking extended leaves, seeking therapy, or quitting outright. You couldn't write satire this perfect, Morgan said. If someone pitched this as fiction, you'd say it was too on the nose. But the article didn't stop at the workplace, and neither did Morgan Montecito, the supposed sanctuary, the place they fled to for peace, privacy, and healing. Vanity Fair quoted neighbors, and the descriptions weren't flattering. Entitled disingenuous local villains. Morgan laughed at that phrase, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. They moved to escape the media, he said, and then immediately invite Netflix, Oprah, podcast crews, photographers, and publishers into their lives. At some point, even your neighbors notice you're not hiding, you're performing. And that, Morgan argued, was the real story. Not that Harry and Meghan hate the media, but that they hate uncontrolled media. They don't want privacy. They want authorship. They want to decide when the camera rolls and when it doesn't. When silence suits them, it's a boundary. When exposure suits them, it's courage. He brought it back, as he always does, to the timeline. They left the royal family in 2020, claiming unbearable scrutiny. Since then, they've given more interviews, released more personal content, and generated more headlines than they ever did as working royals. So, which is it? Meghan asked. Are you traumatized by attention or addicted to it? Then he went for the jugular, hypocrisy fatigue. Climate lectures delivered from private jets. Poverty messaging paired with $500,000 baby showers. Calls for compassion issued from mansions. Meghan argued that none of these moments destroyed the Sussex image on their own. What destroyed it was accumulation, the stacking of contradictions until the narrative collapsed under its own weight. Behind closed doors. And now Vanity Fair wasn't just noticing, it was documenting. Meghan reminded viewers that the bullying allegations from the UK never went away. They were just buried under NDAs. What's new, he said, is that the same complaints are now surfacing in America. Different staff, different companies, same stories. When the pattern crosses borders, he said, you stop blaming the system. By the time he turned to Prince Harry's obsession with privacy, Meghan was almost amused. Harry, the self-appointed crusader against media intrusion, is by Meghan's account, the single greatest violator of royal privacy in modern history. Oprah Netflix, a memoir stuffed with intimate family conversations, private arguments, personal grievances sold for profit. The call is coming from inside the house, Meghan said flatly. And that was the note he ended on for this first act. Not anger, not triumph, just inevitability. Vanity Fair didn't destroy Harry and Meghan, Meghan concluded. It simply stopped protecting them. And once that happens in Hollywood, the fall isn't loud.
There's lots of fascinating snippets in there. Clearly, the journalist has interviewed many sources, mostly anonymous sources.
It's thorough. And this is where Piers Morgan said the real panic sets in for Harry and Meghan. Because once the protection evaporates, there's nothing left to hide behind. No palace silence, no royal mystique, no institutional buffer absorbing the blows. Just two celebrities standing alone in the open. Discovering that without the monarchy as a villain, their story collapses. Meghan argued that for years, the Sussexes benefited from a uniquely powerful shield, guilt. Media outlets were terrified of being accused of cruelty, racism, or insensitivity. Hollywood wrapped them in cotton wool. Every contradiction was excused as trauma. Every failure was reframed as healing. Every criticism was dismissed as harassment. But Vanity Fair shattered that spell by doing something radical, treating them like adults, adults with contracts, adults with staff, adults with obligations, adults whose behavior has consequences. That article, Meghan said, was the sound of Hollywood saying enough. He pointed out that Vanity Fair didn't need to exaggerate. It didn't need inflammatory language. It simply stacked first-hand accounts next to the Sussex brand messaging and let the contradictions speak for itself. Compassion versus employees in therapy, privacy versus constant exposure, victimhood versus unchecked privilege. And Meghan emphasized one brutal truth. You can survive being hated. You cannot survive being disbelieved. For Harry and Meghan, disbelief is spreading fast. He turned next to the Netflix problem, the quiet one no one wants to talk about. Not cancellation, not outrage, indifference. Projects that land without impact, shows that disappear within days, content that fails to trend unless it includes royal grievances. The Polo documentary, Meghan scoffed. Nothing says relatable humanitarian like millionaire aristocrats hitting horses with sticks. He argued that Netflix tolerated underperformance as long as the Sussexes delivered controversy. But controversy is finite. Family secrets run out. Audiences fatigue. And once the royal well dries up, there's nothing underneath it. That's when Meghan pivoted to what he called Meghan Markle's most catastrophic miscalculation yet. The lifestyle rebrand. A glossy, aspirational series, luxury kitchens, perfect lighting, celebrity friends. Homemade elegance curated for mass consumption. On paper, it's harmless, familiar, almost boring. But timing, Morgan said, is everything. California had just been devastated by historic wildfires, families displaced, homes lost, entire communities reduced to ash. And into that context, steps a duchess filming herself in a mansion plating artisanal food, inviting viewers to admire her perfect life. It's Marie Antoinette energy, Morgan said bluntly. Let them eat sourdough. He wasn't suggesting malice. He was suggesting obliviousness, a total inability to read the emotional temperature of the room, the same blindness that produced the New York baby shower during lectures about poverty, the same blindness that fuels speeches about climate responsibility, delivered from private jets. This, Morgan argued, isn't bad luck. It's a pattern of detachment so severe it borders on parody. And the worst part, they still don't understand why people are turning on them. According to Vanity Fair, neither Harry nor Meghan had concrete plans when signing their multi-million-dollar deals. They had access. They had attention. They assumed that would be enough. Morgan called it entitlement economics. Real creators, he said, show up with ideas. They evolve them. They grind. These two showed up with grievances and assumed the world would bankroll the rest. Then he revisited Harry's infamous podcast fantasy, the one Vanity Fair described with barely concealed disbelief, interviewing world leaders like Vladimir Putin and tech titans like Mark Zuckerberg, not about policy or power, but about their childhood trauma, positioning himself as the emotionally healthy baseline while diagnosing others as sociopaths. Morgan almost couldn't finish recounting it without laughing. This, he said, is a man who has detonated every relationship in his life, who can't speak to his father or brother, who monetized his grandmother's final years, and he thinks he's the control group for psychological normality. That idea alone, Morgan argued, explains everything. The delusion, the lack of self-awareness, the inability to grasp why deals collapse and staff disappear and audiences tune out. They don't see the problem because the problem has never been them. And now that illusion is cracking, Morgan reminded viewers that the royal family has already moved on. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. The most devastating kind of rejection. No interviews, no rebuttals, no reconciliation, just distance. They didn't cut them off to be cruel, Morgan said. They cut them off to survive. Because when every private conversation becomes potential content, trust becomes impossible. When every family disagreement risks ending up in a documentary, silence becomes the only defense. Harry and Meghan traded intimacy for influence, and now they have neither. Morgan closed by returning to the Vanity Fair article itself, not as an end point, but as a warning shot. This wasn't the British tabloids. This wasn't Piers Morgan. This was the American media establishment quietly recalculating the cost-benefit analysis of the Sussex brand. And the math no longer works. Hollywood doesn't exile people loudly. It doesn't need to. It simply stops calling, stops booking, stops defending, stops pretending. That, Morgan said, is what you're watching happen in real time. He predicted no explosive downfall, no dramatic scandal, just a slow fade into irrelevance, projects delayed, deals not renewed, coverage thinning, applause replaced by silence. And for two people whose entire identity depends on attention, silence is the one thing they cannot survive. They wanted freedom. Morgan concluded what they're getting is exposure, and exposure without credibility is lethal. The fairy tale is over. The victim narrative is fraying, and the audience, the same one they've lectured, scolded, and manipulated, is finally asking the only question that matters. What if we were wrong about them? Because once that question takes hold, no PR firm, no interview, no lawsuit, and no carefully staged lifestyle show can put the illusion back together again. And that, Morgan said, isn't cruelty, it's accountability.